The artist is entering the dome, and it's about time. Three different ways to enter the dome. Fantastic. Oh, no wonder I'm wearing a hat. So welcome, everyone. I don't think there's an intro to this, so we'll just introduce ourselves. I'm Wayne Baerwaldt, and this is Marie Lannoo.
Sorry, Wayne, should we wait a couple of minutes just for David to arrive at least? I feel like we need to wait 2 minutes. Is everyone okay with waiting 2 minutes? Sorry.
You can hear me? Do you want a sip of wine? No? Okay.
But I thought we wanted to start on time and move things along, right? Oh, who's David? Okay.
Where's John?
Right, okay, good.
I don't see him. Sure, go for it. Why not?
Amazing show. I'll go back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again for being here. I'm Wayne Baerwaldt, the guest curator of this exhibition in Extremis, working with Marie Lannoo. We're going to have try to move a conversation along today that takes you back in time just a little to look at some of the formative works that have informed this body of work that most of you, I hope, have seen upstairs in the observatory gallery. So now we have to go off the main slide. I don't think I can do that. Control room. Okay, good. So Marie, if you can see right above you, I think you can talk a little bit initially about your studio practice, which has really been about getting at color through the practicing knowledge of light in the studio as an artist, but also your understanding of the science of light, which really takes you in different directions, optically, with different surfaces, different processes of making in the studio. So I'm just going to show you a couple of slides. Marie hasn't seen these slides, so it's going to be a bit of a gong show. I don't want to say gong show, a surprise maybe, but she's very familiar with these works. So just maybe talk for a couple of minutes and you'll see what's coming next.
Okay. Yes, so this is a series of paintings that I did called Spectrum, and each of the panels was 5 by 5 feet with acrylic paint on aluminum. And I was very interested in the physics of light, and the physics of light in relation to how the human body perceives color. And how that happens actually is via wavelengths. So color actually doesn't exist. Wavelengths in the ether are the things that exist, the things that we see through our optic brain and process those into the colors of the visible light spectrum. And humans see in the visible light spectrum, but other critters see in other spectrums, like the ultraviolet spectrum and the infrared spectrum. So we are in a tiny little zone of perception via these wavelengths. And what I was interested in doing with this series called The Spectrum was going through the colors of the spectrum. I think I used 6, not 7. I don't think I added indigo. Yeah, I don't think I added indigo in that series. And implied time in our perception of color. And that's why you see a gradation of color from the outside of the shapes to the intensity of the inside of the shapes. So color is informed by light. Humans perceive color via light. And what I wanted to do technically was come up with a process that would illustrate this scientific phenomenon through paint. And I thought, well, I can do it by gradation and just making a gradation of shapes that get smaller and smaller but more intense in color. And so that's what I did with each of the colors of the spectrum. I was very interested in the science of, in the physics of light, and trying to come to some understanding of that, because I just at that point in my studio practice didn't feel that I knew enough about the formation of color and the perception of color. And so I really stepped back and did a lot of scientific research into the perception of color and, you know, how color manifests itself through our optic brain. I worked also with the Canadian light source synchrotron in Saskatoon. Oh, this is another one. So I'll talk about this one in a second, but I worked with the synchrotron, and this is the only facility in Canada where they use light to look at matter at the subatomic particle level. So here's an example of what they can do, which, I mean, is absolutely fascinating. So light travels around a football stadium size, you know, shape, container, whatever, and then there are these little boxes that have windows inside of them that the light can actually penetrate. So let's say a herd of cows has a liver disease, and they cannot figure out what the problem is, how this started, how they can treat it, how they can cure it, all the rest of it. They put that liver sample in this box, they shoot this light around at really incredible speeds, and they look into that liver at the subatomic particle level and then are able to take that sample out and analyze what the cause of this disease is. And so I thought, well, why am I not looking at color like that? You know, at the subatomic particle level of color, or looking at color at the nanoscale. And that's what got me interested in really analyzing the physics of light. So this series of work, and this one as well, was part of an exhibition that was called The Architecture of Color. And I took the wavelength and I analyzed through the work that I produced in this particular series. This is another one though, this is the Blue Sky Project. But anyway, yeah, this one. So what you see here is all of the colors of the spectrum in each one of these primary color discs that were lasered into half-inch thick acrylic panels. And then I put transparent gel on the backside to give you the colors of the spectrum around each one of these. And as, I don't know whether I said this already, but I did say it in the exhibition space, when all of the wavelengths of the visible light spectrum are at the same intensity, you have white light. And that's what happens in the center of each one of these primary colors for a painter, with wavelengths in each of their frequencies etched into the panel. And then the next slide, no, it's the Blue Sky Project. Okay, back one, this one. Okay, so this one, I had never really analyzed the different colors of blue in the sky until I said to myself one day, well, why don't I do this? I mean, I just assume that the sky is blue, but light, color is unstable and always in the process of coming into being. So I thought, well, why don't I analyze the blue sky, the color blue in the sky, over the 4 months of the year, from my daily life experience, getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. And let's see what happens over time, and I'll photograph it in 2 places, behind my house in Saskatoon and behind my studio. That's it, because these are the worlds in which I live. And I wanted the project to be really, really specific to my life, my timeline, 7 in the morning till 10 at night, and generally speaking, the blue sky, the changes in the blue sky in that timeline are really quite substantial and significant. And so I started taking photographs over a year and the 4 seasons. And then I collaborated with a very great acrylic paint company in New York upstate called Golden Paints with their tech team. And we came up with the blues that coordinated with the colors that were in the photographs that I had taken of the blue sky in my 2 locations. And what I did was then, at the top of these circular discs is the morning at 7 o'clock, and at the bottom is the evening. And that is winter, that's fall, and that's summer. So look at the different colors of blue in our sky. And until I had done this project, I had never really spent any time thinking about or looking at the sky to absorb all of these incredible differences. So, it wasn't until I did the project that I figured that out.
And of course, only on the prairies.
Only on the prairies, that's right.
Would you get this access to light? You wouldn't be able to do this in Toronto in the same way, or many other places, of course.
Absolutely.
Even Vancouver, of course, very
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, yeah.
So then, I'll just sort of break that off now,
And
Marie, because I think we should go right to the point where we start this body of work and where I met Marie in the studio, of course, masked at the time during COVID, and really exploring in a very different way. So maybe you can talk a bit about the starting point. And you, I think, have the first canvas from this series in the exhibition upstairs
That
as you
little
enter
one.
to your immediate
the very
right.
first one. Yeah. So I was thinking about color, and I was doing a lot of much more colorful pieces, and I had switched from panels and aluminum panels to canvas, and this is how I was painting just pre-COVID. And then COVID hit, and all of the decisions that I had taken, rescale of the work, treatment of the paint on the surfaces, all of that just became much more reinforced in the studio. I knew that I wanted to work on a smaller scale and have these very intimate experiences with each of the paintings that I did, because COVID was completely overwhelming and anxiety-ridden and stressful and all the rest of it. I just couldn't cope with things that were big. I just couldn't do it. So it was these tiny little things that I started with, so that I could hold them in my hand, I could look at them, I could put them in my purse and take them home if I wanted to, and have just a really intimate connection with this work. And so the initial paintings started out much more colorful than they evolved into as the series progressed through COVID. I will say, COVID was very, very good to me. Honestly, I worked like a demon. Now, how do you luck out and get that kind of a response to a global pandemic, lockdown and isolation? Like, I don't know how that happened. I was just extremely lucky, because a lot of other people that I knew who were working artists were paralyzed. They just couldn't do anything.
So I think it was interesting, too, that we started with the idea of a publication, as I mentioned upstairs, this idea of trying to reproduce the experiential qualities of these paintings, if possible, even though it's almost an impossible challenge. It is. But we went through, quite a discussion, a process of discussion, looking at the layering of cellophane and trying to understand, on my part, better understanding of how the layering of these acrylics work to give you certain effects, I would say. And of course, your mission was a lot more detailed and accurate. Maybe you can describe that process of making.
So I work with transparent layers of acrylic paint. And so what does that mean? That means that I squeeze a liquid color into a medium, whether it be gel, medium, tar gel, self-leveling gel, something like that. And I mix stuff up in a cottage cheese container that all my girlfriends drop off for me at my front door, which is really great. They wash them out first and then they drop them off. And so I don't have a palette. I guess I'm a bit nonconformist in that sense. I don't have a palette that I mix colors on. I mix the colors on the canvas. So if I want purple, I put blue down first and then I put red over it. It's transparent colors. it's a very old master technique, master-mistress technique, but I'm just using acrylic paint to do this. But this is, Rembrandt did this, you know, very, very thin layers of oil paint that had a lot of medium in it as well, to get flesh tones that actually breathe flesh, you know, that aren't flat flesh, but actually feel like living flesh. Well, that's the same sort of process that I use to create the paintings.
Secrets from the studios. This is the session where you hear it all.
Exactly, yeah. So here's,
And you get really unique effects and surfaces, you know. Maybe you could describe some of them and then get into discussing the edges and how important they are in the history of painting, actually.
so the tools that I use big squeegees. So very similar to printmaking squeegees, only the rubber that's in the printmaking squeegees is often very stiff. And I don't like the stiffness of it. I get the least stiff durometer rubber that I can, which at the moment is 60. Normally printmakers use 75, and there's a really big difference. There's a very stiff, it's almost like a metal edge, where my edge has a little bit of give. And I'm really interested in the human hand, my touch being a very big component part of the painting. I don't want them to, when you come up close to them, I don't want you to think that they're machine made. I want you to see my hand in them, the human touch, the flaws, drips that happen, you know, all of those kinds of things I think are really, really important. So I simply do a lot of underpainting. So this is a very, very interesting painting. Okay, I'm just going to jump ahead here because the color on this painting, I think, hovers off of the surface. It's not even attached to the bloody canvas, this one. The illusion, and I can't remember how I did it. I've tried to duplicate it and I just can't. So you are in a state of being where you're listening to your intuitive voice saying, do this, do this, do this. And actually that's exactly what happens. It sounds completely crazy, but it isn't. I have, at least during this period of time, that voice was very, very loud and clear, and I listened very attentively to it. And these kinds of things happened, and I stepped back after I finished them, and I just couldn't figure out how I had done them. So the color is simply pulled onto the surface of these paintings and deposited on the edges so that there is a kind of deconstruction of the painting on the outside surfaces, and then a kind of very spatial depth of field in the centers of these things. And my intent was that viewers would enter almost a portal in the center and go into a dimensional experience and travel wherever it is that they wanted to go, and hopefully connect with that painting in the same way that I had connected to my materials and my artistic self in the making of it. And then the deposits on the outside edges of the painting, if you need to come back to reality, you can just grab that bottom purple edge or that green edge or whatever. Come back to reality and then travel back into the center and go off to wherever you needed to go to get away from the noise of this pandemic, I guess. But I think it translates beyond the pandemic and just generally, just the noise of life that you may want to turn off for a brief second and remind yourself that you are a sensorial being and have levels of consciousness and dimensions of travel that you may not allow yourself to do on any given day. And maybe in front of one of these paintings, if you stay long enough and look long enough, which I hope you will find a way to go to some other place.
So of course, this style of painting, so to speak, comes out of a tradition of color field painting, certainly in the 20th century, the second part of the 20th century, and of course, right into the 21st. Many artists have adopted a particular style. I think you have a different relationship to color field painting and painting as a process, which is really unique. You were informed to some degree by abstraction, even through the dialogue that took place at Emma Lake, in the late Emma Lake in the early 80s, mid 80s, before it collapsed. This is in Saskatchewan. But you also have a sense of how an environment will change your experiential, the experience of a painting. And that's something that we wanted to take on in the space, the observatory space. Maybe you could describe a little bit about some of the elements that we added to the exhibition.
In terms of the installation?
The screen itself,
Yeah.
the coloration of the screen, and the very subtle coloration of one wall in particular, the so-called powder pink wall, but how that affected the other adjacent walls. And that's also a very subtle sort of experience.
Okay, so to the idea of In Extremis, we set the exhibition space up with the diagonal, the dark diagonal, really purposefully. And what we wanted it to take place there was to have this dark and surrounded by light, right? So the paintings on the perimeter, other than the pink wall with the black ones on it, are generally white or off-white, blue-whites, and the paintings that are on the diagonal are a bit more colorful, certainly on one side. We wanted also to imitate the color of the cover of the book. And you will notice on the text and the cover of the book, it's a very, very deep blue, and then there is the silver foil reflects a lot of color. So we had a very matte surface with a very textured blue cover with silver foil as a counterpoint. So again, In Extremis, you open the book up, you see a black painting. You get to the last page, you see another black painting. But the paintings in the center of the book are generally white. So again, In Extremis. And that's how we set the wall up. The central wall that dissects the space in half, and the white sort of perimeter around the outside. Then another choice was a pink, a very subtle pink wall. And how we set that one up was there are black paintings on this pink wall, and as you take the corner, there is a pink acrylic painting that's on a shelf. Why is it on a shelf? Because if you look very closely and pay attention, there is a lovely pink reflection that bleeds onto the wall from that painting. So you come from a solid painted wall that's a very material presence to a reflection in the ether. And this is the nature of color.
But we should also talk about the quality of that white wall. It's not your normal eggshell white. We purposely went out to find the whitest white possible.
We could find, yeah.
That we could find to allow that sort of effect to take place.
Yeah, so color manifests itself in many, many different ways. And the exhibition space was set up to try to display that. There's also another wall where that purple painting is. Oh, we've got to talk about the slit too. So if you notice it, I'll tell you, now you will notice it. So it starts on the right-hand side as very high gloss white. It's medium gloss in the center, and it's matte, matte, matte white at the end. But it's only the people who spend time and pay attention who are actually going to notice that, I think. But, it's those subtle things that I guess I'm inviting the viewer to try to experience when they're looking at these paintings. And again, I'm asking them to do something that is not a part of a normal day. I'm asking you to stop and pay attention. And that's really not how we spend our time. We're on our machines, 3 seconds flipping through, doing this. I'm really asking you to slow down and really just take some time to look and experience something. I hope it happens.
Well, speaking of that, we were also concerned with the kind of shadow that you get under a painting, the frame of a painting. Sometimes, that's problematic for an artist or for a viewer, but we actually worked with that. And here's an example, Marie. Maybe you could talk about how that sort of illusion of a void the sort of geometry of that space, and sort of layered shadows were actually purposely placed there.
Yeah, no, again, it's adding several more colors to those paintings in darks that I didn't have to paint. We just had to light, and then these shadows, sort of appeared under these paintings in these incredibly beautiful shapes, and in gradation as well, so it's almost like the high gloss surfaces of some of the paintings, when you stand in front of them, you're reflected in that painting. So you're kind of implied in the experience of that painting, but I didn't have to paint a figure. All I had to do was put a high gloss surface on there that would reflect your face, your body, the environment that the work existed in, to make you a part of the experience of that thing.
That's typically the case. And then occasionally, with one work only, it's a bit of a trick piece where you present yourself as a shadow in the piece.
There it is.
One only in the whole exhibition,
Yeah.
if you've noticed. It's a bit of a joke. Okay.
That's fun. Okay,
And
the
that's-
slit though too in the wall. So you
Let's
talk
go-
about the slit. Tell them
No,
about
you
the
talk
slit.
about the slit. I'll go
Okay,
back to
well,
the
so
slit.
the slit. So why would
The
we
slit,
put a
both
slit
sides
in the
of
wall?
the slit.
Both sides of the slit. So you really look at the bottom of the slit and the triangles there, and refer to what I just talked about of the shapes that were created in the shadows that exist below those paintings. Those triangles match up with some of those shadows when you look through that transparent slit. And what we did was we had a transparent slit that you can stick your hand through and see through. And then the opposite of that is the shelf that the pink painting is actually sitting on. So that blue slit is absolutely solid material. So again, it's an in extremis, tiny little in extremis detail, right? But that was really meaningful when we installed it in that corner and had that slit on the wall. Yeah. What else is there? That's good. Is that Chris's quote?
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up a little bit. This is the back cover of the publication where we see a quote by Chris Cran. And I was joking a little bit, and Chris Cran, of course, is here. It's a bit of another inside joke that, Chris is quite an enthusiastic supporter of Marie's work in particular, and work by a lot of artists. He's a great supporter in the community, as you know. So I just thought we'd throw that up here. And I don't think there's anything after this, is there? Aha, there is actually. There is a sculpture that is coming in I would say the next 6 weeks, to be safe. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the materials that create this effect. And again, excuse the reproduction here, but talk a little bit about this sculpture and how it would be situated, at the base of the stairs that go up to the observatory.
So I mentioned earlier that I worked with the Canadian light source synchrotron, with the scientists at the synchrotron, and I had found a material called reflective diffraction grating material, which is what this stuff is. And what it does, it's a material that has tiny little slits in it, and when light hits these slits, it splits the spectrum up into its constituent parts. And I had no idea how this worked or what I could do with it, so I thought, well, maybe I'll just contact these guys and ask them a lot of questions and see what will happen. So what ended up happening was I got a much more, a fuller understanding of how this material worked. And I thought, well, why don't I create, on an architectural scale, a fully immersive, three-dimensional color experience for my viewers. So this wall is 6 feet high, and it's 68 feet long. And you enter into the curvilinear spaces of this diffraction grating material, and if you just, sunlight actually animates it really well, but it reflects all of the colors of the spectrum, not only on the material itself, but on the ceiling, on the sidewalls, on the floor, so that as you walk through this, you are fully immersed in this three-dimensional full spectrum color. It will come, and hopefully we'll be able to put it at the base of the stairwell to the observatory, and we're really hoping to use the window. There's a round window in the white floored space just beyond the end of that stairwell, so that light, which is, so that sunlight, the sun, is our greatest and most powerful source of light. That will be the thing that shines on this material, and we hope that the people that travel on the tram will be able to see it from the train through that round window. I mean, well, that's what we're going to shoot for anyway.
In fact, they'll be blinded by it.
They'll be blinded by it.
On a sunny
They'll get a
day.
tan. They'll get a tan from it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's reflective diffraction grating material. It's a foil. Yeah, that comes in rolls, and so thin, paper, thin, very, very thin. So this was laminated onto a polyethylene plastic kind of material
And
that's
this was-
used actually to make car seats. Yeah, I got it from a car company.
And there's a support system, of course, that allows it to
stand up,
stand
yeah.
vertically and to be
Yeah.
shifted around in different locations.
Okay.
Anything to add? We're
It-
going to try to keep this brief. I think we might have another opportunity to speak when this piece comes and is installed, and we might even talk about the fact that you might see your work in terms of a tradition of feminist painting, which we're not going to talk about tonight,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Is it? Yes,
Yes,
we're going to do
yes,
that right now. We
questions.
want to save a bit of time for that instead. Are you okay with that?
Sure. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, so we have two microphones, one with me here and one with Muriel. If we could turn on the lights, the spider lights or whatever they're called, just so that Marie and Wayne can see who they're talking to, if that's possible. Well, thank you. Okay, is there a question for Marie? Raise your hand.
Tack next to you, David.
Oh my goodness.
Hi,
Tack
Tack.
fam.
Not my full
Nothing.
name.
Nothing too hard. Okay.
I try.
Okay.
Thank you, Wayne and Marie, for bringing such a beautiful show here to Calgary. Would you mind going back to the installation shot of the show? So want to reference it, maybe like with the wall. Yeah. So I think Marie, and maybe Wayne as well, I really appreciate how you often like bring the environment around you, into your work. And as I see, the setup of the of the show, and that dark blue and the split, it really reminds me of your studio back in Saskatoon, because that's what you have got like painting out front, right? Like on the exterior of like very dark color.
Yeah.
And just and how how like very hot your paintings are, right? I think there's like a level of heat in each of the work, which is like the amount of light and the energy that are centralized on the surface there. So like, to me, kind of like when I see that split, it reminds me of yours. Kind of like it brought me back to your studio and the windows that you have in the.
I hadn't
In
thought
the
of that
bay.
before, actually. But
Yeah,
that's really
and I think just
interesting.
like put it into context to your blue sky project of how you capture the color, kind of like around the nature around you.
Yeah.
I just want to say that like I can see that kind of like through line there and that connection there, and I think it's just so poetic. And for someone who could like follow your work for your practice and know you and how you work and the environment that you're working in, I think to me it's just so like special and so personal.
Thank you.
So I just want to share that.
That's really great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very true, because in that studio, and it's too bad we don't have an image or two. Well, there was one image of you in the studio, but it didn't show the two walls of windows. So there's a real play of natural and artificial light in this quite spacious studio. And I, of course, was in the studio too many times, and noticed you would stop and say, look at this painting again. Look how it's changed. Look at this painting. Let's bring it out into the light. Let's take it into the artificial light and see how it changes. So we have a much more controlled gallery space. So we had upstairs, we had to play with light differently and try to bring out a sort of sense of excitement, actually, in those extremes that you're describing. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Also, just to your comment about poetry, I really hope that this work connects with viewers in many ways, but one of them is certainly in a poetic way. Why? Because we are living in a time where we need to remind ourselves of the beauty of the human form and the human mind, the beauty that surrounds us beyond the human form, because it's being swallowed up by so many other things. And so if you see and feel poetic moments in that exhibition space and in the paintings, then I really feel very excited, you know, that what happened to me while I was making them has translated into you, the viewer, seeing them, right? And I just think we need so much more of this at this particular point in time.
Anyone else?
Oh, here.
There's a microphone. Hold on.
yeah, I can.
I have a loud voice. Just in terms of materials, Marie, so you mentioned liquid as opposed to squeezing out of a tube, and I'm wondering why.
Well, why did I choose to wear a black dress and you have white clothes on tonight?
Voila.
That's why. Honestly, I think that's one of the sweet mysteries of life. You bond with your materials in a particular way, and everyone is very, very specific. And that's the way in which I am able to work in a very productive capacity.
So, I mean, in terms of transparency and mixing in the gel medium, I would think it would facilitate that mixing more than with the tube using a liquid paint. Is that correct?
Yes, because what I want these paintings to do is be illuminated from the inside. And when you have a very solid, hardcore solid paint material, it's already opaque in front of you. It has no depth of field. It simply has a wall. At least that's how I read it. So
Yeah.
I have to mix mediums inside or within this color to make it transparent in a way that I know when I put it on a surface, it's not going to create a wall for the next color.
Exactly.
It's going to create depth of field
Yeah.
for the next color and allow breath. Matisse is somebody who said, when you look at a painting, you should be able to take your hand to that painting and put it around the shape that's
Who said
inside of
that?
it. Matisse.
Oh, Matisse.
That you want it like skin. I want depth of field like flesh, you know, that is, it's more than the outer layer. There's a lot of stuff going on underneath it.
And also, are you using spray?
No,
So it's all brush and
no brush. I don't use brush. I use squeegees
completely all the time?
all
Really?
the time. I've never used brushes.
And do you use sandpaper?
Nope.
Well, no, because, you know, like Chris Flodberg's, he uses sandpaper.
I don't.
In
Okay, you know what the
between
trick
layers.
is for that?
What?
Okay, here's a little trick for you. Okay, so to get that smooth surface, what you do is you wet the back of the canvas. Sponge wet it, the whole damn thing. And then you just damp dry it with a paper towel. And when you pull acrylic paint over top of that surface, you get a very, very smooth surface. And then you let that dry, and the back end dries, and you wet that back again, and then you put the next color
So
on.
it sounds like you make your own squeegees.
No, I have a company who makes them for me, though.
Okay.
But I buy the durometer rubber,
Right.
That's what I get. And I take it to them, and then they custom make these wooden handle things. They're heavy, and now they're full of paint, so they're even heavier. But whatever, I just really like
But you
that
clean
handmade.
them each time.
Yeah,
when
you
you're
have to
done.
clean them each
Right.
time. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
I think
That was
Dick,
good.
Dick in the front row here, Muriel has a question, and then raise your hand if I know where to go next, if there's another question in the audience over there. Okay, great.
Thank you very much. Really engaging. So I wondered, Marie, if you can talk a little bit more about your visit to the Canadian light source synchrotron, if
Yep.
I wrote that down and remembered it correctly.
Yep.
And so I certainly picked up myriad colors, and it's more than what it seems at first. It kind of reminded me of years ago. You go and buy a tube of paint and you'd mix it yourself or whatever, and there weren't that many paints, and now there's a lot more paints, and it's like computer screens, they have millions. It's like McDonald's, billions served, right? So did you find from your visit to the synchrotron that there was, I'm trying to get more of a granular level of what you discovered by going there, but also you talked about how the matter is placed in the middle and then the light is projected at incredible speeds. So is there more than one speed of light that they create at this place?
Well, I don't know exactly what the speed of light is that they create, but it has to be a high enough velocity that it can actually activate the particles at the subatomic level in whatever the matter is that they're analyzing. So whatever that speed happens to be. And does it change based on what the matter is that's in these little compartments? I'm not quite sure. I had no idea. I didn't know what diffraction grating was. I didn't know what a diffraction grating was. I didn't even know what that was. And okay, I'll tell you how I found out about this stupid thing. I was taking my car in to get serviced, and I pulled it into the, whatever it is with the hole in the ground, the bay. I pulled it into the bay, and I look up and I see this full color reflection on the ceiling in the corner. And I'm like, I jump out of the car and I run to the guy and like, what's that? What's that? And he pulls down a piece of this material. That's where I found it. Out like at a car dealer thing where I was getting the car fixed. Yeah. So, I guess there are moments where things happen that are simply meant to be. So because I didn't know anything about it, I thought, well, why not go to the people who know something about this? And the synchrotron, again, what a perfect location for a synchrotron in Canada, in one of the cities and provinces that produces the most light over the course of a year than anywhere else in the country. So we have that thing. And honestly, I knew someone through a friend, and I contacted them, and then they contacted a few scientists. And these guys just jumped right in and said, sure, we'll meet with you. So I brought this material, and then I asked them to tell me how it worked. I didn't know how it worked and what I could potentially do with it. Did they use it in the facility? What do I have to read to find out more about this? And then it's just sifting all of that information in your brain and letting it percolate and then translate into what it ended up translating into. And they helped me with that.
So this piece of material that you got from the roof at the car place, did you put that in the vessel in the synchrotron and they projected light into it? Or did they just analyze it and they kind of knew what it was?
No, they already knew what it was. They knew what it was. And I'm a colorist. I should have known what that was too, but I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
I had no idea what that was and what the capability of it was, right? And they were the ones who taught me. And I'm really thankful to them. And they, as I said, they were really enthusiastic about collaborating with an artist. It was really great, really, really great. And I'm still in touch with some of them.
That's great. And it's called diffraction? Or?
Diffraction grating, yeah.
Thank you.
And this is reflective diffraction grating. So you can get transparent diffraction grating material and reflective diffraction grating material. And it has medicinal, it's used in medical research, for example. So they calibrate in cancer research what level of the red in the spectrum your cancer problem is at. They put it under a microscope and analyze cancer and the levels of severity of cancers through transparent diffraction grating materials.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Is that at U of S on campus?
Yeah, it's on campus at U of S. Yeah. Beautiful facility.
Yes.
Hi. This might be getting a little interpretation-y, but how much do you think your work is really reflected by its experience within the pandemic?
I think it's completely and totally reflected in my experience of the pandemic. I don't know that I could have done this body of work at any other time. You know, I really don't. There were magical surprises that happened in the pandemic that may have momentarily happened in other periods of time in the studio, but that happened during the pandemic over a sustained period of 2.5 years. Like, I don't think it could have happened. Like, I've never done white paintings before this, before the pandemic. White? I just never did. So, I mean, the conditions that I was experiencing during that period of time, I think are totally and utterly reflected in this series of work. Absolutely.
The reason I ask is because you talk a lot about the meticulous curation and details and installation elements regarding the entire exhibit. Things about like the grading of the paint or specific details that you wouldn't notice unless you spent a really long time with this or that piece. And I'm thinking it's like a reproduction of the level of insularity you'd have during a time like lockdown, where you're faced with the wall, where you have to look at every single detail because you don't really have any other option.
True, absolutely, yeah. And also, maybe the surprise of those little details were a really important component part as well, you know? But yes, I think you're right.
Any other questions? Maria, I love that you talked about color and never painting in white. There's this lovely thing happening. Marcel Zama last week said, you know, I've never really painted in full saturation. So you've done a little switch swap-aroo, which is kind of fun, but they're quite magical. Sorry, was there a question down here? Okay, go ahead. I'd like to acknowledge that the left side of the room needs to ask more questions.
Hi. This is a reference to something Wayne alluded to, but it didn't get further talk. The borders are not real borders, but accidental is not the right word, but the intuitive borders. You mentioned that in history, in painting.
They're considered borders. I think every artist, of course, considers those edges and how the paint is built up, what is accidental, what is purposeful, what that border does, you know, to, in this particular case, to take you back to the center, perhaps. That's a strategy.
Yeah. I used to use intentional borders. I'm an abstract painter as well, and I use golden. But it was, to me, it finished the piece. It finished the piece, but that's just me. So I don't think, I'm just going to ask you if that was, doesn't sound like that was your intention, that, you know, you were in the zone and it was a special time.
But I'd never put borders like that on work before.
Yeah, no, I don't think so, because I've got catalogs of yours from way back.
I never had before.
Yeah.
Why did I do it then?
Why not?
Well, but I think it's deeper than that.
Oh, yeah, I agree, yeah.
You know,
yeah.
I think there was a purpose there that my intuitive voice was able to translate.
Yeah, well,
you know, to me. And also this whole idea of time being implied in the process of making these paintings. I mean, it was a very specific historical moment in time, and maybe what I was doing, and I don't think I was doing this, what's the word? Purposefully, or not purposefully, but intentionally. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. I just did it.
Yeah, I just did it. Yeah.
But what it does is, if you read from the outside in, you can actually deconstruct how this whole thing was made over time.
Yes.
You know, and so time becomes another element that's embedded within the experience of these paintings. And you have an actual physical manifestation of that time on those outer borders, which you don't have in the center. Right?
Yeah, I agree, and I appreciate that, because I know I try and spend as much time with a piece as I possibly can. So I'll be back many, many times.
Great, great.
Thank
That's really
you.
nice to hear.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. Oh, maybe Tony right here, and then we can go back down to the.
So my question is about the fractured identities that make us a whole as human beings, gender.
Put it closer.
I was thinking about fractured identities that make us a whole, like gender, class, etc. And then looking at your painting and the refraction of the different wavelengths that come together and form a solid particle, is there an intersection between your gender and your lived experiences refracted and coming back together in your piece and also in your conceptual self? I don't know if that makes sense.
There must be. There has to be. I mean, I'm a female painter, and so my observations of the world and my interpretation of the world is through that lens. Now, that is completely and totally reflected in the work that I do and the way in which I make the work, I think, right? And as I said, I felt very, very closely connected to who I am as an artist while I was doing these paintings. So all of the things that you're talking about are absolutely reflected and manifested in this work. They have to be. That's who I am.
Thanks, just a couple of technical things. So on raw canvas or gessoed?
Gessoed.
Raw.
Gessoed.
Really? Really?
So it doesn't absorb. It has to sit on the surface.
But you were talking about wetting it from behind.
It's raw on the back, though. You wet
Yes,
the raw
but
canvas
for
on
it
the
to come
behind.
through.
Well, it does, though. It does.
We
So
should
I
have,
buy.
we should have acknowledged there's $100 charge per secret. No, I'm just
That's
teasing.
more than that. $1,000. Jeez. Yeah. No. So it's.
This
so
is
it's,
the last secret.
Yeah. This is less. So I buy pre-stretched, pre-primed canvases, but they don't ever have 6 or 7 coats of gesso on them.
No.
They have maybe 1 or 2.
Right, right.
And so there
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Water can definitely inform the surface of a primed canvas.
So I'm assuming that you're working on several canvases.
Yes, at the same time.
Because they've got to
Each of them has to dry before
dry
you can do
before
the
you
next
do
layer.
other
Yeah,
layers
yeah,
and
yeah,
so
yeah.
on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for
Last
coming out.
last call
This
for
is
any
like-
questions. I don't think
Oh.
I saw any other hands. So
No.
maybe with tremendous thanks to both Marie and Wayne for this talk and this discussion. As I mentioned in the atrium, Marie has so kindly offered to put whatever dedications in her incredible catalog. There, I think, are fewer than 20 copies now left. So I would encourage you to make your way there if you're interested in having a copy, and more will come in due course. But please join me in giving our immense thanks to Wayne Baerwaldt and Marie Lannoo for this incredible exhibition and talk. Okay, you may exit through the bottom stairs, left or right, or the top, and enjoy the rest of First Free Thursday at Contemporary Calgary.